Hello everybody and welcome to this week's video. For this week I am doing this leaf watercolor tutorial. I use the Arches watercolor paper, and as you can see here it does have two sides. I prefer the slightly rougher side. Then I'm using the Amethyst number 2, Holbein Black number 2, and the Royal Inlaying Nickel number 6 round brush. I used m.graham watercolor. I used the Maroon Perylene, the Pyrrole Red, Hansa Yellow, Sap Green, and then the Sepia is optional. And for those of you who are interested, I have made sure to link all of the materials used in the description box down below. Now to get started, I am taking my Hansa Yellow and I'm doing a really light wash with this. I know that some of the yellow is going to show through at the end, and this is a really delicate, really light colored leaf, and you don't want to go too strong with this. If you need to, use a scrap piece of paper and just kind of test out the color that you have. Now for this, since I'm going to be doing a lot of wet on dry, you do want to let that set. Now I'm going in and I'm using my Hansa Yellow again, and I'm mixing that with just a little bit of Pyrrole Red. I just want to slightly tint it, and as you can see it's a really nice kind of muted orange, and I'm just putting that down and I am blending outward. I am putting down my paint, rinsing it off, drying it off, and I'm just coming back in and I'm blending it outward towards the dry areas. And now you can see me going in with a smaller brush while it is still wet, and I'm adding a more concentrated wash of my pigment. And now you can see me start to go through and add these diagonal lines, and I'm just kind of working on adding that texture to the leaf and blending it out as I go. Now at the bottom you can see I am adding in the Sap Green, and I'm doing the same thing. This is wet on dry, and I'm adding it towards the outer edges, focusing on the bottom, and I'm adding it to the outside of the leaf, and then taking my brush, cleaning it off, drying it off, and then blending it outward. Now I'm going back in with the orange mixture, and be careful to put down your watercolor and then blend quickly. With this paper, for whatever reason, I ended up with that harsh line, but since this is more of an organic object, I didn't really worry about it. And I'm just going back through again, back with the Sap Green, and I am layering up to get the colors that I want, and back in with the orange. And I'm really being cautious to keep a really light, delicate wash and color to this. I don't want to make it overly saturated. However, if you decide that you want something that's really bright and saturated and pigmented, then go right ahead. So now I'm going in with the sepia, and what you could do is add a mixture of the Maroon Perylene and your Sap Green and mix them together until you got a brown. So if you're just starting out and you're trying to work from a limited palette and not buy too many colors, then feel free to leave it out. It's definitely not necessary. If you have it, or if you can afford to add it to your collection, if you have other uses for it, go right ahead. So now I'm just taking my smaller detail brush and I'm adding in these really light areas. Some of them I'm adding very specific concentrated little dots and areas where the leaf has kind of aged and gotten older, and then in some areas I am adding like a wash to it just to give it the look of age and that it's been worn. And I'm using the same technique. I'm adding down my more concentrated color, and then I'm going back and I'm just blending it out into the dry area. And this is a really great practice for your water control and your blending. You can get a really great feel for a lot of these techniques, and since this is a more organic object, if you do happen to make any mistakes, then you really don't have to worry about it. It's just all part of the final product that you'll end up with. And again, I'm just layering. I like to glaze a lot. If you find that you would like to do a one-step wash and just kind of go for the color that you want, feel free. I really, like I said, I like to glaze. And now I'm going through and I'm adding a really light wash to some of the edges, again giving it that older worn look, and I am blending it out. And now I'm taking a little bit of Maroon Perylene and just kind of darkening that top edge and more of my brown color around the bottom corner here. I'm going back in with a little bit of orange, and I just wanted to kind of fill in that bottom area. I noticed that I had left it a little bit untouched, and in my reference image it did have a little bit of color there and it wasn't just yellow. So I'm going in now and I'm taking my sepia, or of course your mixture of Maroon Perylene and Sap Green, and I'm adding in little dots, like these little age spots or dots that you would see on a leaf in the fall as it's kind of starting to change colors, as it's turning to winter. And some of these I'm leaving untouched, some of them I'm blurring out. I am varying the sizes of all of them, and I'm not being too particular. Again, if you were using a reference photo, be sure to keep checking your reference photo and just look at all of those little details. So for the spine of the leaf, I'm adding the maroon perylene, and I'm just being really careful to just kind of stick in that area. Since this was a really dark spine, I am going in with a pretty concentrated mix, and I'm working that from the top, which is very, very thin, all the way down to the bottom, which is quite wide. Now I'm going back in, and again I'm adding more of my brown paint, and I am adding color to the edges, and as you can see here, I took my Holbein number 2 and I just blended it out, and I'm going back in with my detail brush and I'm adding a lot of this color around the edges. I really want to emphasize that older look to it, and you can see I'm not being careful when it comes to the details that I've left there. Those little dots had dried, and you can see that you can still see those dots, but it softened them quite a bit, and that was, I thought, a really pretty look. So don't worry about it if you end up going through and you blending it out and some of those dots have gone away. You can always add them back in later. Now I'm adding a little bit more detail to the bottom kind of stem of the leaf and around the bottom of the leaf, and I'm paying attention again to my reference photo, adding more little dots, and that's really all this process is paying attention to the detail, adding in those little spots, little age marks, little bits where the leaf has changed color. It's adding color and just being really cautious about your layers. And now we're starting to get into some of the more interesting details of the leaf, and that is those diagonal looking textures to the leaf. So I'm using my maroon perylene for this, and it's a really, really light mixture, but it's a beautiful color for this, and I'm just kind of going through, and you can see on one side I'm sticking a little bit closer to the stem of the leaf, on the other I'm just kind of going from the center, and you can kind of do this intuitively, or you can use your reference and just see what you like, or try to remain as accurate as you can. And now I'm just kind of going in with a little bit of yellow, which is hard to see, but it just created a little bit more texture. It wasn't so much of a color that I was trying to add to it. And also it kind of acted to blend out that maroon perylene a little bit more. And now you can see I've zoomed in on this leaf to help you see what kind of really light, delicate textures I am adding to this leaf. I'm using a really light hand. This is something that you probably want to practice with a little bit beforehand, or if you're doing, some of this other detail as you go, as I have in this tutorial, you can kind of get a sense of how much pressure you need to get different size dots and textures. So whatever you find most comfortable, just kind of go with what you feel. But I'm just adding in that texture. I'm adding in these little lines to emphasize and show that diagonal kind of motion and look to the leaf. This leaf didn't have a lot of veining throughout the entire leaf. You just had that center one. So emphasizing that there is a more natural kind of organic diagonal structure to this leaf was important to me. I didn't feel like that was conveyed as well as I wanted to with just the red. Now you can see I'm going in on the other side. I'm adding a little bit to that red veining and just adding little dots. For this step, do make sure that your painting is completely dry, or else you'll end up with a lot of bleeding into the rest of your leaf. And if that's not the look that you were going for, then you will want to wait for it to dry completely. I did have a slightly heavier hand on this side, but again, since it's more of a natural object, then it wasn't something that I was concerned about. And just going back in, and again, adding more detail, adding more dots, adding And now I'm going through and I'm doing the same thing, but I'm using my Perylene Maroon again, kind of reinforcing those diagonal lines. And in this case, you can see I made one that was actually pretty thick. So one thing that I will say is don't worry about just finding an angle that works really well for you, something that is more natural. I know for myself, my hand and wrist kind of move in the same kind of motion as the line I'm making. So always kind of lining it up to be really natural for myself is really helpful. I know, especially in a tutorial kind of environment, it can be kind of annoying for other people to watch. But if you're just doing this tutorial on your own, feel free to keep turning it and finding angles that work best for you to get the details the way that you need them to be. And that's basically it. It's just reinforcing that shading, that detail, the shadows, the look of aging in the leaf, and just getting it to a point where you really like it. Since this is a more natural object, feel free to take some liberties with it and not stick so closely to your reference if you don't want to. It's a great practice in realism. It's a great practice in shading and adding detail and looking at your object to translate what you see in that photo or object to a painting. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people looking at a photo or an object and skipping over a lot of these tiny details. And I think you can see in this painting how much those really, really help the final product. If you have followed this tutorial, feel free to tag me on social media. I would love to see it. And if you liked this video, I would love it if you would comment down below and let me know what you liked or what you didn't like, or maybe anything you would like for me to include in a future video. That is all for today, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye!